Grant Archer had rehearsed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, yet nothing prepared him for the way his heart hammered against his ribs as he stood before the weathered wooden door of the Texas ranch house he had once known so well. The late afternoon sun dipped behind the pecan trees, casting long streaks of warm gold across the porch, and the quiet hum of crickets rose from the tall grass as if nature itself held its breath with him. He had imagined Lila's face, imagined her surprise, or her anger, imagined the first word she might say after 5 long years, but what he had not imagined was the small blue bicycle lying on its side beside the steps. The paint was bright, the training wheels were dusty, and one handlebar was wrapped in a fraying ribbon patterned with tiny stars. 5 years ago, that bicycle did not exist. 5 years ago, there were no toys, no signs of a child's laughter on this porch that still smelled faintly of cedar and old memories. As Grant lifted his hand to knock, intending to gather the courage he had promised himself on the flight back to Texas, a sound rose suddenly from the other side of the door. It was faint at first, a soft giggle, the unmistakable sound of a child laughing. The tiny voice trailed into a cheerful squeal that made Grant freeze where he stood. His mind raced trying to match the sound with every possibility except the one that made his chest tighten in bewildered fear. He stepped closer, stunned, leaning slightly toward the door, as if he might decipher the impossible truth waiting behind it. Before he could form a rational thought, the door swung open. Lila Dawson stood framed in the doorway, her auburn hair loosely tied back, her blue eyes wide, startled, almost frightened, her lips parted for a breath that never became a greeting. She stared at him as if he were a ghost risen out of a past she had long buried. Grant opened his mouth, ready to say her name, ready to apologize for every mile and every silent year that now weighed heavily between them, but before a single sound left him, Lila slammed the door shut. The wood cracked with the force of the impact, and Grant stepped back stunned. His pulse roared in his ears. He had expected anger, perhaps maybe heartbreak, but not this. Not a door slammed in his face before he could speak one word. From inside, muffled and trembling, he heard Lila's voice crack like fragile glass. "Grant, you cannot be here." Her words sliced through the heavy heat of the Texas evening. They carried a fear he did not understand. Grant pressed a hand gently against the closed door, not pounding, simply anchoring himself as he fought confusion and the sting of rejection clawing at his thoughts. "Lila, please, I just want to talk." No movement came from inside. Only silence thickened between them, tense and unsteady. He stepped back again, glancing at the abandoned blue bicycle, then at the windows drawn shut with curtains he did not recognize. The ranch felt like a stranger, and the woman behind the door felt even more distant than she had in the 5 years they had spent apart. 5 years of unanswered messages, 5 years of no explanations, 5 years of wondering why the woman he had once planned a life with had vanished from his world without a trace. In his pocket, he felt the folded letter that had changed everything. The letter had no return address, no signature, nothing but a single sentence written in hurried ink. "If you still care about her, come back to Texas. She needs you now more than ever." Grant had stared at that line for days, unable to shake the sense of urgency in the handwriting. Someone wanted him here. Someone knew something he did not. And now, standing before the closed door, with the echo of a child's laugh still ringing in his ears, He felt the weight of that mystery settle heavily on his chest. A gust of warm wind swept across the porch, rattling the loose sheet metal on the roof and shaking the old wind chimes that hung near the door. One sudden crack of thunder rolled in the distance, signaling an approaching storm. The sky darkened, and Grant instinctively looked up as the wind picked up, tugging at his shirt collar. A storm was coming fast. Grant knocked again, firmer this time, but not unkind. "Lila, the weather is turning. I will not leave until we talk." Still no response. The wind intensified, slamming against the house with quick bursts that rattled the windows. A loose board on the porch groaned beneath the sudden pressure. Grant took another step back as the first drops of rain spattered across the wooden planks near his feet. "You will get caught in the storm." Lila's voice finally came through again, this time closer, softer, but no less distressed. "You should go." Grant stared at the door, jaw tightening. "I am not leaving," he said, "not until I understand why you are acting like this." Another crack of thunder jolted the house. The wind ripped through the porch so violently that the bicycle toppled over and rolled several inches. The storm was almost upon them. The doorknob rattled. The door opened only halfway, just enough for Lila to stand between him and the world inside. Her expression had softened, but fear still clung to the corners of her eyes. The wind roared behind Grant, tugging at the loose branches overhead. Lila swallowed, stepping aside as the storm whipped another blast of wind across the porch. "Fine. Come in," she said, her voice barely steady. "The storm will not wait." And neither will the truth he had come for. The moment Grant stepped inside the small ranch house, he felt as if he had entered a different universe, one that did not resemble the world he had shared with Lila 5 years ago. The living room was warm and modest, filled with sunlight, filtered through thin curtains, and decorated with handmade crafts that looked far too delicate to belong to Lila alone. A stack of children's books sat neatly in a woven basket. Near the couch and beside it lay a set of crayons scattered across a low wooden table. A tiny red sneaker rested near the hallway entrance, as if someone had kicked it off in a hurry. Grant's eyes drifted from item to item, each one adding to the growing knot of questions in his chest. Lila moved ahead of him with a quiet urgency, picking up the stray sneaker and placing it on a shelf as though hiding evidence she did not want him to see. She appeared different from the woman he had left behind. Her hair was shorter, brushed into waves that framed her face. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes, signs of exhaustion that did not come from a simple long day. Yet she carried herself with a confidence that came only from surviving something difficult and choosing to keep moving forward. Grant watched her avoid his gaze as she poured 2 glasses of water and placed them on the kitchen counter with hands that trembled slightly. He wanted to ask about the childlike objects scattered around the house, but instinct told him she would shut down if he pressed too quickly. Instead, he stepped slowly into the kitchen, noticing a small guitar hanging on the wall beside a wooden toolkit. The instrument was half finished with its soundboard still unattached. He touched the edge of it gently, feeling the precision of her work. "You have been building guitars," he said quietly. She nodded without looking at him. "Repairing them too. The town does not have many people who specialize in this anymore. I guess it became my thing." Her voice carried a soft pride, mixed with something more guarded. Grant knew Lila had always loved music, but seeing her live inside a life so different from the one they once dreamed of together filled him with a bittersweet ache. He leaned against the counter studying her. "You are good at this, you always were." She pressed her lips together, refusing the compliment. She picked up a small box of colored pencils and placed it inside a drawer again with too much haste. Grant's eyes followed her every movement, troubled by the way she kept clearing away the signs of another presence. He remembered the bicycle outside the laughter behind the door, the red sneaker. Lila paused when she saw him staring. "Do not read into things," she said quickly, her tone too sharp to be convincing. "This is just life. People change, houses change." Grant stepped closer, stopping only when he saw her retreat slightly. Not out of fear, but out of the desire to maintain a distance she seemed determined to keep. He softened his voice. "I came here because of the letter. Someone wanted me to know something. Someone said you needed help." At the mention of the letter, Lila froze. She turned her back to him, gripping the edge of the sink as if steadying herself. Her shoulders rose and fell in a tense breath. Grant approached slowly. "Leela, he said what happened after I left." She laughed under her breath, a tired sound full of disappointment. "The problem is not what happened after you left, Grant. The problem is everything that happened because you left." Her words struck him harder than any accusation could. He felt the weight of them, the unspoken hurt, woven through each syllable. Lila finally turned around her eyes, shiny with emotions she refused to let fall. She looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and unresolved pain. "Why are you here now? Why come back after all these years?" He met her gaze directly. "Because I never stopped caring. Because the letter said something was wrong. Because when someone tells me you need help, I will always come." Her jaw clenched as she stared at him, torn between wanting to push him away and wanting to believe he meant every word. Grant noticed a small ukulele resting on the armchair beside them. Stickers shaped like tiny planets covered the wooden surface, each one placed awkwardly, as if done by a child. His chest tightened again. Lila followed his gaze and quickly moved the instrument behind a cushion, her voice rising with tension. "Grant, please leave it alone." He stepped back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I am not here to take anything from you, Lila. I am just trying to understand what you are hiding from me." Her face paled slightly. She shook her head more to herself than to him. "You should never have come back," she whispered. "You do not belong in this world anymore." He frowned, confused and hurt, but before he could reply, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. The storm was creeping in fast. Lila glanced toward the hallway, as if checking something that was out of his sight. Her voice trembled again. "Grant, please just stay out of the back rooms. There is nothing there you need to see." That was the moment he knew with absolute certainty that she was lying. He did not know what she was protecting, but he could feel the truth pulsing behind her fear. And it had something to do with the laughter he had heard, with the tiny sneaker, with the bicycle, with everything she was desperately trying to hide. He waited until she looked at him again, her eyes pleading for space, for time, for distance. Grant inhaled slowly. "Lila." He said, "I am not leaving you again, not without answers." Her breath hitched and she stepped away from him as if the words themselves shook her. The storm wind groaned against the house, and she turned to close the curtains, finally letting her guard falter for one brief moment. That single moment told Grant he had barely scratched the surface of the life she had built without him, a life shaped by secrets he was determined to uncover. Grant woke the next morning to the muted sound of roosters crowing somewhere beyond the ranch fence, and the distant hum of a pickup rattling down the gravel road. The air smelled of dew and wood smoke, and the Texas sky stretched wide above the fields like an endless sheet of pale blue. He had slept on the old couch in the living room, and although his neck ached, the unfamiliar warmth of the house wrapped around him in a way that felt strangely grounding. As he sat up, he noticed that the tiny basket of children's books had been moved tucked neatly under the coffee table, as if Lila had wanted to erase the smallest clue of a child's presence. But she had left behind a half-eaten bowl of cereal and a cartoon-printed cup already rinsed and sitting in the sink. The contradictions in the room unsettled him, pressing against the unanswered questions he had carried all night. He rose quietly and wandered toward the kitchen, drawn by the smell of brewing coffee. Lila stood near the counter, her back to him, wearing a soft gray t-shirt and jeans. She poured the coffee into 2 mugs without turning around, as though she had already sensed his presence. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. "There is coffee if you want some." He stepped closer and gently accepted the mug she offered. "Thank you," he said, studying her face. She avoided his eyes again. The silence settled between them, not hostile but thick, with all the words they had not spoken. Grant leaned against the fridge, sipping carefully, and let his gaze drift around the room. On the far wall hung a framed photograph of Willow Creek's small main street, the one lined with antique stores and the ice cream shop they had used to visit on summer nights. Below the photo was a new poster he did not recognize. It featured the bold title Wyatt Music Co. and a glossy picture of a modern music store with bright lights and smiling employees. He frowned. "Is that new?" Lila stiffened. "It is from Mason's company," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "He is expanding across Texas." Grant studied the poster a moment longer. "He is trying to buy up every music shop in the state, is he not?" Lila hesitated. "Something like that." Before he could ask more, a knock echoed from the front porch. Lila tensed visibly, placing her mug down with a quiet clink. She wiped her hands on her jeans and walked to the door, opening it only a few inches. "Morning, Lila." A familiar male voice drifted in, polite but too curious. Grant moved closer and saw an older man, probably in his 60s, wearing a worn denim jacket and holding a paper bag filled with fresh eggs. "Morning, Ed," Lila said, trying to block his view inside. "Did you need something?" Ed chuckled lightly. "Brought you some eggs from the farm. Figured the little guy might want some breakfast." Grant's pulse spiked. Little guy. Lila's expression tightened as she reached for the bag. "Thank you, Ed. Really. But you should get going before the sun gets too hot." Ed leaned slightly to the side, spotting Grant through the narrow opening. "Well, now is that who I think it is?" He gave a slow whistle. "Grant Archer back in Willow Creek. Never thought I would see the day." Lila stepped firmly between them. "Ed, please. Not today." Ed nodded knowingly, as if reading everything in her eyes at once. All right, I will let you be. But tell the boy I said hello." He tipped his hat and walked off down the porch steps. Grant stood frozen. Lila closed the door and pressed her forehead against it for one strained second before turning around. He tried to keep his voice steady. "The boy." Ed said boy. Lila inhaled sharply. Please do not start this again. Not here, not now. He moved toward her. I am not blind, Lila. I hear things, I see things. And you are trying too hard to hide every part of the truth. She shook her head and brushed past him toward the kitchen. Grant followed slowly, resisting the urge to corner her. Instead, he sat at the small table while she gathered the eggs and placed them near the stove. Trying to change the subject, she said, I have clients today. Instruments that need repairing. You might want to stay here until the storm aftermath clears. The roads are muddy. He folded his hands on the table. I did not come here to hide in your house. I came to understand what happened to us. Lila kept her back to him. You left Grant. You walked away. He felt anger and hurt rise at once. I left because I was forced to. You know that. She went still. The council did not force you to stop writing. They did not force you to disappear completely. Grant rose from his chair, frustration pulling at his words. I wrote to you. I emailed you. I reached out every way I could. Lila laughed softly, though sadness clung to the sound. Then why did nothing reach me? Why did every message vanish into thin air? Grant opened his mouth to respond, but the weight of her question settled heavily between them. Before he could reply, the screen door creaked loudly. A gust of warm wind blew into the kitchen as the door swung open, revealing a petite elderly woman with a basket of pecans. Morning, sweetheart. Brought you some fresh nuts for the little one. Her sentence trailed off when she spotted Grant. Well, now you must be Grant. She smiled kindly. Welcome home. Lila practically ran to intercept her. Agnes, thank you, but this is not a good time. Agnes blinked, confused. Oh, I thought the boy might want to try the new pecan recipe. Lila whispered urgently. Later, please. Agnes nodded, gave Grant a thoughtful look, and slipped away with a gentle sigh. She closed the door behind her. Grant stared at Lila. Every person in this town seems to know something I do not. She looked exhausted. Please stop pushing me. I am trying to keep things from falling apart. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Then let me help. She shook her head. There are things you cannot fix, not anymore. Grant looked toward the window, watching sunlight pour across the dusty fields. He felt the divide between their worlds stretching deep and wide, but the same Texas sky hung above both of them, unchanging and relentless. And he knew with certainty that whatever she was hiding would not stay hidden much longer. By late afternoon, the Texas sky darkened with heavy clouds that rolled toward the ranch like a slow-moving wall of gray. Grant stepped outside to help Lila secure the porch furniture as the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and distant thunder. The air was warm yet electric, charged with the same tension that had lingered between them since the moment he arrived. Lila hurried to close the shutters while Grant lifted a stack of firewood and carried it inside. When he returned for another load, the first drops fell thick and warm against his skin. Within seconds, rain hammered the roof in fierce, uneven bursts. Lila called from inside, urging him to hurry. He stepped through the doorway just as the wind slammed it shut behind him. She jumped slightly at the sound, pressing a hand to her chest. The storm is moving in faster than expected, she said, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. We should check the barn doors. Grant nodded and followed her to the back of the house, where the hallway opened into a mudroom lined with boots and tools. He tried not to look at the tiny pair of blue rain boots tucked beside Lila's larger ones, but they caught his eye anyway, tightening the knot of questions in his chest. Lila pulled on a jacket and grabbed a lantern. "You ready, yeah? Lead the way." The wind roared louder as they stepped outside, pushing against them with startling force. Sheets of rain blurred the trees and fencing, and the barn loomed ahead like a dark silhouette. Grant and Lila ran toward it, water splashing against their legs, hair whipped by the fierce gusts. They reached the barn doors just as the wind yanked one of them open. Grant caught it with both hands, muscles straining as he pulled it shut again. Lila held the other door, her fingers slipping on the wet wood. On three, Grant shouted over the storm, 1, 2, 3. Together they forced the doors closed and slid the heavy latch into place. Lila bent over, catching her breath, and Grant placed a hand on her arm to steady her. Her skin was cold from the rain, and a shiver ran through her. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get back inside." They dashed through the downpour and stumbled into the mudroom, soaked and laughing breathlessly from the absurd challenge the weather had thrown at them. Lila squeezed water from her hair and wrung out her sleeves, while Grant rubbed his hands through his own dripping hair, sending droplets onto the floor. When their eyes met, the laughter faded, replaced by a heavy silence that pulsed with something deeper. Grant stepped closer, unable to pull away from the intensity of the moment. She held his gaze, her breathing still unsteady. "You always ran straight into storms without thinking." She whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And you always followed me in," he said softly. Lila swallowed, blinking, as if trying to reset her emotions. "This is not the same, Grant. Nothing about this is the same." "Maybe not," he replied, taking another slow step toward her. "But something is still here. You feel it too." Her shoulders tensed, torn between stepping back and leaning in. The lantern on the counter flickered, sending shadows across the walls. The house groaned as the wind smashed against it, thunder rolling like a distant drum. Grant reached out and gently brushed a strand of wet hair away from her face. Her breath caught and her eyes fluttered shut for a moment before she opened them again with visible effort. "Grant," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do not do this. Not now." He let his hand hover near her cheek, not touching her but close enough that she could feel the warmth. "Tell me you do not feel anything," he murmured. "Tell me to walk away, and I will." She inhaled sharply, her lips parting, but no words forming. The house trembled under a burst of wind, and Lila stumbled forward slightly. Grant caught her by the waist, pulling her instinctively against him. She grabbed his shoulders to steady herself, and for a suspended moment time seemed to hold its breath. She was so close he could feel the rhythm of her heartbeat, quick and uneven, matching his own. Her eyes lifted to his, filled with longing and fear, wrapped into one fragile expression. His hands lingered at her waist, and her fingers curled lightly around his shirt. A single inch separated their faces, and when Lila closed her eyes, he thought she was giving in. He thought she was ready to bridge the distance of 5 painful years in one breath. But almost immediately, she pulled back, her eyes snapping open with a rush of panic. "No," she whispered, stepping away from him with her hand pressed over her heart. "I cannot, Grant. You do not understand." Something in her voice felt final, fragile, and desperately protective. He exhaled slowly, pushing down the ache that rose inside him. "What are you so afraid of?" She shook her head, unable to look at him. "It is not fear for me. It is fear for what this could do, what it could break." He followed her gaze as it flicked toward the hallway, the same hallway that had haunted him since the night before. A shadow moved faintly, too small to be an adult, disappearing the moment he tried to focus. Lila quickly stepped in front of him, blocking his view. "Grant," she said softly, "please stop asking questions you are not ready to hear the answers to." He touched her arm gently. "Then tell me the truth." The wind screamed outside, rattling the windows and shaking the walls. Lila closed her eyes with a painful sigh. The truth she whispered could destroy everything all over again. And before he could respond, the lights flickered, dimmed, and went out, leaving them standing in darkness, with only the storm and their unspoken feelings pressing in from every side. The storm raged through the night, shaking the shutters and rolling thunder across the open fields. But inside the darkened ranch house, the silence between Grant and Lila became heavier than the storm itself. When the power finally returned hours later, flickering weakly through the living room, Lila sat on the edge of the couch, staring at her hands, while Grant leaned against the window frame, struggling to piece together the fragments of a past neither of them had fully confronted. He watched her chest rise and fall, slow and uneven, as if she were bracing herself for a confession she did not want to give. Grant finally broke the quiet. "Tell me about 5 years ago. Tell me why everything fell apart the way it did." Lila did not answer at first. She looked up with eyes filled with exhaustion, eyes that seemed to carry the weight of memories too painful to revisit. "You left Grant," she whispered. "You got on that plane and you never came back." He pushed away from the window, shaking his head. "I left because the board demanded it. You remember what happened?" She gave a small, humorless laugh. "I remember everything." The scandal had hit like wildfire 5 years earlier, a leak from an anonymous source claiming Grant had manipulated early data to inflate the value of his company before its public offering. The accusation had been false, later proven baseless, but in the early days the press had torn into him with relentless hunger. Grant remembered the cameras outside his condo, the endless interviews, the pressure from investors. He remembered the emergency meeting at midnight, when the board told him that staying in Texas would make him look reckless, unprofessional, unavailable. They told him that his return to Seattle needed to happen immediately if he wanted to save his company. They told him that the relationship he had with a woman in a small Texas town would only damage his credibility. Even worse, his father had stood across the conference room with the same cold expression he had worn throughout Grant's childhood, voicing the sentence that had cut deepest: "Texas will ruin you. Walk away now before it destroys everything you built." Grant closed his eyes, hearing it again. "I wanted to stay, Lila. I fought to stay." She shook her head. "You left anyway. You disappeared." He took a slow breath, trying to steady the frustration rising inside him. "I planned to return in 1 week. I told you that." She lowered her head, and her voice softened to a broken whisper. "I never heard those words." He frowned. "What do you mean? You read the note I left. You got my messages. I called. I emailed. I tried every way to reach you." Lila lifted her gaze, and the raw pain in her eyes made his stomach twist. "No message ever reached me. Not one." He stared, stunned. "That is impossible. I sent them. You must have changed your number, or your email or something." "I did not," she said firmly. "I waited. I checked every day. For weeks." Her voice trembled. Then the accident happened. Grant froze, confused. "Accident?" She nodded. "I was driving to the airport to find you. I was speeding. It was raining. I lost control." She inhaled shakily. The truck rolled off the road. The world went dark. Grant felt his entire body go cold as he imagined it. The woman he loved trapped alone hurt. Why did you not tell me? She closed her eyes. Because I could not. I woke up in the hospital 3 weeks later with a concussion and broken ribs. The doctor asked who they should contact, and I told them your name. They tried. He stepped closer, heart pounding. And she shook her head slowly. They never got through. And when I finally got out, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. She swallowed. And then someone told me the truth. I was told you had moved on. Grant felt the world tilt. Who told you that? She hesitated, her lips pressing into a thin line. Someone at your company, a man in a suit. He visited the hospital a few days after I woke up. He said he was there on your behalf. Grant felt a flash of burning anger. That is a lie. No one at my company knew where you were. I did not send anyone. Lila shook her head. He seemed official. He had your company badge. He said you were rebuilding your reputation and needed peace. He said you wanted distance. Grant felt sick. I would never say that. I was trying to contact you every day. I was drowning without you. Her voice broke. Then why did he say it? He sat down slowly on the coffee table facing her. I do not know, but someone interfered. Someone made sure we lost each other. Lila looked at him as though trying to decide whether to believe him. I waited for you, Grant. I was carrying something you should have known about. His breath caught. He knew she was not talking about simple emotions or heartbreak. She had been carrying something literal, something life-changing, something that explained the toys, the laughter, the tiny shoes, something that explained the fear in her eyes every time he asked too much. He whispered her name. Lila, what were you carrying? She pressed her hands to her face as if the truth itself might shatter her. Her voice came out barely audible. I was carrying a future you never knew existed, a future that vanished when you did. Grant moved closer, knees almost touching hers. What happened to us was not an accident, he said gently. Someone stole our chance. Her shoulders shook. And now you are back, but everything is different. Everything is complicated. I cannot afford to let you break this life again. He reached out slowly, not touching her but offering the warmth of his presence. I did not break it, Lila. Someone else did. And I am going to find out who. She lifted her face, tears shimmering. The storm finally softened outside, leaving only the quiet tapping of leftover rain. Grant felt the truth inching closer, heavy and inevitable, and he knew they were standing on the edge of something that would change everything forever. The storm had weakened by the time night settled over the ranch, leaving behind a restless wind that rustled the trees and carried the scent of wet earth through the open sliver of the kitchen window. Inside the house, the power flickered uncertainly, as if unsure whether to stay on, bathing the rooms in a warm but fragile glow. Grant stood in the doorway, between the living room and the hall, his thoughts tangled with everything Lila had revealed and everything she had refused to say. The truth hovered somewhere close, almost within reach. But something in her eyes told him she was terrified of letting it surface. Lila moved quietly around the kitchen, tidying up dishes left from earlier, though he suspected she was simply looking for something to do with her hands. The silence stretched thin between them, until it felt like one wrong word could make it tear. Eventually she turned to him, brushing her palms on the sides of her jeans. You should get some sleep, she murmured. Today was a lot. He studied her the way fatigue softened her posture, the way worry shadowed her features. Lila, he said softly, there is more you have not told me. Her gaze flicked away, aimed toward the darkened hallway, with a nervousness she could not hide. Not tonight, Grant. I cannot do this tonight. Her voice trembled on the last word. Before he could insist, gently a sudden harsh crack echoed from outside, jolting both of them. It sounded like a heavy branch snapping under pressure. Lila gasped and hurried to the window as wind picked up again, rattling the glass. Grant followed her and watched as another gust pushed the trees dangerously close to the house. We should check the porch, he said, already heading toward the door. Lila grabbed his arm. Be careful. The wind surged again as he stepped onto the porch where broken branches and scattered debris littered the wet wood. The railing shook violently, and Grant scanned the yard, looking for anything that might cause immediate danger. He spotted a limb leaning precariously against the roof and made a mental note to remove it in the morning. He turned back inside, wiping the dampness from his arms. Everything looks all right for now, he said as he stepped in. But before he could close the door fully, another loud crack rang out. This one came from inside the house. Lila's face went pale. Grant stiffened, listening closely. The sound repeated, a sharp little thump, followed by a muffled cry. It came from the end of the hallway. The hallway she had been guarding since he arrived. The hallway she had begged him not to enter. He exchanged a tense glance with Lila. Her hands trembled slightly as she whispered, "Stay here. Please, Grant." But the small, wavering cry came again, this time clearer, higher-pitched, undeniably, the voice of a child. His chest tightened with a mix of confusion and fear he could not yet name. He took a step toward the sound before Lila moved quickly, placing herself between him and the hallway. "Grant, do not," she pleaded. "Not this way. Not like this." He shook his head, adrenaline rising. "Lila, there is someone back there." Her breath hitched. "Please, Grant, I am asking you not to open that door." He tried to stay calm, tried to understand, but the thin cry came again, this time sounding more distressed, and instinct overpowered restraint. Grant stepped to the side to move around her, but Lila grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "Do not," she whispered fiercely, tears glazing her eyes. "You are not ready." He looked at her then, down the hall, then back at her again. "Tell me who is back there." Her face crumpled, but she did not answer. Another crack erupted louder than before. Grant broke free of her grip and moved quickly down the hall. Lila ran after him, whispering his name in desperation. He reached the small door at the end of the hall, a plain wooden door with paint chipped around the latch. The knob trembled faintly, as if something had pushed it from the other side. He hesitated for only a second. Then a powerful gust of wind slammed against the side of the house, shaking the floor and rattling the windows. The sudden force caused the door to swing open with a burst of air. Lila cried out no, but she was too late. Grant stood frozen as the room revealed itself in the dim glow of the hallway light. A small bed with star-patterned sheets sat against the wall. A pile of children's drawings was taped unevenly above it. Colorful scribbles of guitars and clouds, and stick figures holding hands. Toys were neatly lined on a shelf, though a stuffed bear had fallen onto the floor. And in the middle of the room, stepping back in fear as the door swung open, stood a little boy. He could not have been more than 4. His hair was dark brown, slightly curled at the edges, and his eyes, wide and shimmering with confusion, were a deep storm gray that matched Grant's exactly. The boy clutched the stuffed bear to his chest, his tiny voice cracking as he whispered, "Mama, who is that man?" The world stopped moving. Grant felt the air leave his lungs, as if someone had driven a fist into his chest. His mind scrambled for logic, but there was none. The truth was unmistakable. Those eyes, his eyes. Lila rushed past Grant and knelt beside the boy, pulling him gently into her arms. "Rowan, it is all right, baby. Go back to bed. Everything is okay." The boy pressed his face into her shirt, trembling slightly. Grant stared, unable to breathe. He tried to speak, but nothing came. Slowly, Lila lifted her gaze to meet his. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. Her voice broke on the words she had held back for years. "Grant," she whispered, "this is Rowan. Your son." The house was silent except for the soft sound of the wind outside and the fragile beating of 3 hearts caught in the same impossible moment. Grant stood frozen in the doorway, as though the world had stopped turning, every breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and unbearable clarity. The little boy clung to Lila with trembling fingers. His small frame pressed tightly against her chest, his stuffed bear squished between them like a fragile shield. "Rowan," she whispered softly, rocking him gently. "It is all right. He is not here to hurt us." Her voice cracked as she soothed him, brushing her fingers through his hair with the tenderness of a mother trying desperately to hold a breaking universe together. Grant felt the floor tilt under him. His knees threatened to give out as the truth settled onto his shoulders with a weight he had never known, a weight that felt both miraculous and devastating. He took one unsteady step into the room, but Lila lifted a hand, sharply stopping him. "Do not," she whispered, her eyes wide with panic. "Please give me a moment." Grant swallowed hard and forced himself to remain still as she walked Rowan back to his bed. She tucked the star-patterned blanket around him and kissed his forehead, whispering something too quiet for Grant to hear. The boy peered up at her with sleepy confusion, then looked past her toward Grant, curiosity shining through the lingering fear. Lila gently guided Rowan to lie down again, setting the stuffed bear beside him before she stood slowly and walked toward Grant, closing the door behind her with a soft click. They stood in the hallway, only a few inches apart, but the moment felt like the edge of an emotional cliff. Grant could still hear the faint sound of Rowan shifting under the blankets. He felt his throat tighten painfully. "My son," he whispered, barely able to form the words. Lila wrapped her arms around herself, trembling with exhaustion and guilt. "He is yours." She let the admission settle into the silence. "He is yours, Grant. He always has been." He stared at her, the hurt and disbelief swirling together in a storm of emotions he could not name. "Why did you never tell me? What kind of life did you think I wanted to miss?" He forced his voice lower, gentler. "Why did you hide him from me?" Lila shook her head quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I did not hide him. You were gone. You vanished. I was alone and pregnant and terrified. I tried to reach you. I tried so many times." He stepped closer, emotion tightening every muscle in his body. "Lila, I never got anything from you. Not one message, not one phone call, not one letter." She closed her eyes, pained. "I know that now, but back then it felt like a truth I had no power to challenge. Someone told me you wanted nothing to do with this life anymore. Someone told me you were moving on." His voice sharpened. She shook her head. "I do not know his name. He came to the hospital wearing a suit and a badge with your company logo. He said he represented your executive team. He said you were rebuilding your reputation. He said you needed distance from everything related to Texas. Grant felt fury burn through him like wildfire. That never happened. No one had permission to speak for me. Whoever that man was, he lied to you. Lila pressed her back against the wall, drawing a shaky breath. I believed him. I had no reason not to. You were unreachable. My phone kept saying your number was disconnected. My emails bounced back. Every letter I sent was returned. I thought you had cut me out completely. Grant ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. Someone intercepted all of it. Someone with access. Someone who wanted us separated. Lila looked down, her voice breaking. And while I was trying to find you, my body kept reminding me that time was moving forward. I was alone in a hospital bed when they told me I was pregnant. I wanted to tell you. I wanted you to know. But when I tried again, a second email came back with an automated reply that your account no longer existed. I thought it was your way of saying goodbye. He stepped forward slowly, gently lifting her chin so she would meet his eyes. I never said goodbye, not once. I would have moved mountains to be with you. I would have been there for every appointment, every moment, every breath. Her tears fell harder. You were not there, Grant. I was scared. I did not know how to raise a child by myself. And when Rowan was born, everything changed. My entire world became about keeping him safe. Grant nodded slowly, breathing through the pain. And you did. Lila, you protected him. She shook her head again. I protected him from the wrong person. I protected him from you because I believed the lies they told me. Grant felt something collapse inside him, a quiet breaking that came not from betrayal, but from the cruel realization that both of them had suffered because of someone else's choices. He took another step closer, his voice barely more than a whisper. Can I see him again? Lila hesitated, torn. He is sleeping, she whispered. I know that is not what you mean, but I am scared of what this means for him. Grant nodded slowly, holding her gaze with a depth of sincerity she could not escape. I am not here to take him away from you. I am not here to break whatever life you built. I just want to know him, to know my son, to know the little boy who laughs at night and rides a blue bicycle and sleeps with a bear named Rocket. Lila stared at him stunned. How did you know the bear's name? He allowed a small heart-aching smile. It is stitched on the tag. Rowan must have rubbed it so often that half the letters disappeared. Her face crumpled as the truth of his gentleness struck her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. Grant, this could change everything. Everything, he repeated, softly stepping close enough that their breaths mingled. Lila looked into his eyes, searching for the man. She used to know the man she once trusted with her whole heart. And when she saw him still standing there, still fighting for her, even after learning the truth, she whispered words that trembled with fear and hope. I do not know how to let you be a father after all this time. He touched her cheek, gently wiping away a tear. One day at a time. Let me earn his trust. Let me earn yours again. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, something fragile but real flickered in them. Something like the beginning of forgiveness. Morning light crept slowly across the ranch, spreading over the wooden floors and warming the quiet house with a soft golden glow. Grant awoke early on the couch, his body stiff, but his mind sharper than it had been in years. The truth he had learned the night before lay heavily in his chest, but it also pulsed with a strange new energy, a sense of purpose he had not felt since before the scandal. He sat up listening. The house was still, except for the faint rustling sounds drifting from the kitchen. He followed them and found Lila standing near the stove, turning pancakes with a spatula while humming softly under her breath. But it was the small figure sitting at the table that made his breath hitch. Rowan, wearing a blue t-shirt too big for him and holding a sippy cup decorated with stars, sat with his legs dangling off the chair, swinging them absent-mindedly as he studied a page in a coloring book. His hair was sticking up in every direction, soft and messy, exactly the way Grant's used to look when he was that age. Grant froze in the doorway, watching him as if afraid that blinking might make the boy disappear. Lila noticed him and tensed for a brief moment, then quietly placed another pancake on the stack. "Rowan," she said gently, "we have a guest this morning." Rowan looked up, his large gray eyes curious, the same shade as the storm outside the night before. Grant stepped forward slowly, unsure of how close he should get, unsure of what a first moment between a father and child should look like when 4 years had been stolen from them. "Hi," Grant said softly, keeping his voice low and warm. Rowan blinked at him, studying him with innocent interest before asking, "Are you the man from last night?" The question pierced Grant like a blade, and at the same time filled him with something indescribably tender. "Yes," he said quietly. "I am the man from last night." Rowan nodded thoughtfully, as if processing that information with great seriousness. Lila moved behind the boy, giving Grant a cautious but hopeful look. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked him. Grant nodded and took a seat across from Rowan, trying not to appear nervous. Rowan stared at Grant's hands, then looked up again. "Why were you in the hallway last night?" Lila inhaled sharply, ready to intervene, but Grant lifted a hand gently. "It is all right," he said, then leaned forward slightly. "I heard a noise. I thought someone needed help." Rowan seemed to accept this answer, turning a page in his coloring book. He pointed to a picture of a guitar made of thick black outlines. "This is my favorite one," he said proudly. Grant smiled softly. "Do you play?" Rowan shook his head. "Just pretend. Mama says I have to get bigger first so I do not drop it." Lila let out a nervous laugh as she placed pancakes on Rowan's plate. "That is what you told me," she said, ruffling his hair. Rowan looked up at Grant again. "Do you like guitars?" Grant nodded. "I love them. I used to try to build them when I was your age." Rowan's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? You made guitars?" He lifted the coloring book and held it out. "Want to help me color this one?" Lila froze, stunned by the simple yet meaningful invitation. Grant swallowed past the tightness in his throat and reached for the colored pencil Rowan offered. "Sure," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I would like that." They colored together quietly. Rowan held the book steady while Grant carefully filled in the soundboard with a deep, warm brown. The small boy rested his chin on his arm, watching every stroke as if studying how the world worked through the lines of a pencil. When the page was finished, Rowan leaned back proudly. "It looks so nice now." Grant smiled. "You picked a great picture." Rowan grinned before hopping off his chair. "Want to see my toys?" His little voice was bright and confident, and Grant felt his chest swell. "I would love to see them," he replied gently. Rowan ran toward the living room with the kind of energy only a child could have. Lila watched him go, then turned to Grant with an expression blended with fear, relief, and heartbreak. "He already likes you," she whispered. Grant looked at her, his voice low. "He is incredible, Lila. You did an amazing job." Her eyes softened at his sincerity, though worry remained like an unspoken shadow behind her. Rowan reappeared dragging a small wooden box filled with mismatched toys and building blocks. He dumped them out with dramatic flair, then picked up a tiny plastic guitar. "Look, this one is mine." Grant took it gently. "It is very cool. Do you want to show me how you play it?" Rowan lifted the toy and strummed across, the plastic strings making exaggerated guitar sounds with his mouth. Lila covered her smile with her hand as she leaned against the wall. After a few moments, Rowan tugged on Grant's sleeve. "Come outside. I want to show you something." Lila stiffened slightly. "It is muddy outside," Rowan shrugged. "We can stay on the path. It is dry there." Lila hesitated, then nodded. "Stay where I can see you." Rowan grabbed Grant's hand instinctively, small fingers curling around his thumb, and Grant felt the breath leave his chest all over again. Lila watched them walk to the porch, her eyes filling with something she could not name. Outside, the morning sun shimmered across the grass. Rowan tugged Grant toward the small blue bicycle, leaning near the steps. "This is mine," he said proudly. "I can ride it fast." Grant crouched beside him. "Really?" "How fast?" Rowan grinned. "Super fast. Want to watch me ride?" Grant nodded. "Of course I do." Rowan mounted the bicycle and pushed off, wobbling slightly, but steady enough to make a determined circle around the yard. Grant clapped for him as Rowan returned triumphant. "Did you see me? I did. You were amazing." Rowan beamed. "Mama says I need to practice more so I do not fall." Grant's smile dimmed slightly. "Well, I can help you practice if you want." Rowan's face lit up. "Really, you will help me ride?" Grant nodded. "I would be happy to." Rowan ran to the yard again, shouting, "Mama, he said he would help me ride my bike." Lila stood in the doorway, trying to hide the forming tears. Grant met her gaze across the space between them. In that moment, with Rowan laughing under the Texas sun, he understood something with absolute clarity. He belonged here, not in boardrooms with polished floors and cold glass walls, not in a city that had stolen 5 years of his life. He belonged in this place, under this sky, with the child who carried his eyes and the woman who had once carried his heart. Word spread through Willow Creek faster than wildfire across dry grass. By the next morning, before Grant had even finished helping Rowan tighten the training wheels on his blue bicycle, whispers drifted down Main Street about the billionaire who had shown up unannounced at Lila Dawson's ranch. People peered through shop windows, phones buzzed with messages, and speculation grew like a storm cloud ready to burst. It did not take long for the narrative to twist itself into something darker, fueled by the town's long-standing distrust of wealthy outsiders. By noon, Grant's presence was no longer a quiet return, but a headline in the local gossip network. Some claimed he had come to take Lila's property. Others insisted he wanted to drag her back into a scandal. But the worst rumor of all, the one Mason Wyatt planted with calculated precision, spread the fastest. "He is here to take the boy." Mason had not wasted a second. He strode into Wyatt Music Co. on Main Street, standing proudly behind his polished counter as he whispered to every customer who walked through the door. "Poor Lila," he would say, with a shake of his head. "That billionaire ex of hers is trying to claim legal rights, says he wants to take her son out of Texas. The customers gasped, some clucked their tongues, others nodded knowingly, because small towns thrive on two things: familiarity and suspicion of the unfamiliar. Mason fed both appetites with a smile that never reached his eyes. Meanwhile, at the ranch, Grant remained unaware of the chaotic storm brewing around him. He knelt beside Rowan, holding the handlebars steady, while the boy pushed off and pedaled forward with a determined wobble. "You are getting better every hour," Grant said, smiling as Rowan came to a stop and hopped off proudly. Lila watched from the porch, her arms crossed her heart, torn between fear and longing. She had never seen Rowan connect with someone this quickly, never seen him open up to a stranger with such innocent trust. But Grant was not a stranger, not to the boy who carried his eyes, and not to her bruised heart that still remembered every gentle moment they once shared. Rowan tugged on Grant's sleeve. "Can we go to the park later? Mama said we can when the weather is nice." Grant ruffled his hair. "If your mom says yes, then absolutely." Rowan ran to Lila and grabbed her hand. "Mama, can we please go?" She hesitated, looking toward Grant. "We will see, sweetheart. Maybe after I finish a few repairs." Rowan accepted the answer without complaint and dashed inside, leaving Grant and Lila alone. They both knew they needed to talk. They both knew things could not continue like this forever. But before either of them could speak, a dusty black truck pulled loudly into the driveway. Mason Wyatt stepped out, wearing a crisp button-up shirt and polished boots that contrasted with the mud still clinging to his tires. He fixed a practiced smile on his face and strode toward the porch. Lila stiffened immediately. "Mason, now is not a good time." He pretended not to hear her. "Afternoon, Lila. Heard your visitor has been helping out around here." He turned to Grant, giving him a long, slow glance, filled with controlled hostility. "Grant Archer did not expect you to come back to this town after what happened last time." Grant kept his voice calm. "I am just here to see Lila." Mason gave a sharp, knowing laugh. "Sure you are, though folks in town are saying something different." Lila stepped down from the porch, anger sharpening her voice. "Mason, stop." He ignored her again. "Funny thing, Grant, people say you are sniffing around for custody. Something about taking the boy to Seattle." Grant's blood ran cold. He stared at Mason, realizing instantly that the rumors were not accidental. Lila's eyes widened with shock and fury. "Mason, how dare you spread lies like that?" Mason shrugged. "People deserve to know if a rich outsider is planning to yank a child away from his home." Grant stepped closer, jaw tight. "You have no idea what you are talking about." "And I would never do that." Mason tilted his head with false innocence. "Really? Because to the rest of us, it looks like you are planning to disrupt the life Lila built here. That is what people like you do." Grant wanted to punch him, but Rowan peeked through the screen door, wide-eyed and confused. So Grant breathed slowly, keeping his voice even. "I am here to know my son. Nothing more." Mason's smile faltered, replaced by a dark glint. Then his plan was clearer than ever. He was threatened by Grant, not romantically but professionally. Lila's skill threatened his music empire, and if she had Grant's support, his grip on Willow Creek would weaken. Mason leaned in, dropping his voice. "Let me give you some advice, Archer. People around here do not take kindly to billionaires who think they can walk in and claim whatever they want. It never ends well." Before Grant could reply, Mason turned sharply and walked back to his truck. As he drove away, the dust cloud behind him seemed to echo the tension he left in his wake. Lila pressed a hand to her forehead, her voice shaking. I cannot believe him. I cannot believe he would do something like this. Grant looked at her with deep concern. Lila, what exactly is his problem with you? She hesitated before answering. Mason tried to hire me to help launch his new store here in town. When I turned him down, he got upset. He wanted me to run his workshop and help him brand his handcrafted line. He promised a lot, but his intentions felt wrong. He did not like hearing no. Grant nodded, anger simmering. So he retaliated. She wrapped her arms around herself. Mason knows this town, knows how to use rumors to control the narrative. If people believe you are here to take Rowan, they will turn against you. They will turn against us. As if summoned by those words, Grant's phone vibrated. He pulled it out and saw the caller ID, Harrison Board Chair. His stomach sank. He stepped aside and answered. Grant Harrison's voice barked. What are you doing in Texas? You know the media is sniffing around after last week's leak. You cannot be gone right now. We need you in Seattle. Grant sighed. I needed time. Time to deal with something personal. Harrison scoffed. Your personal life is costing us money. Stockholders are nervous. Do you understand what this means? If you do not return by tomorrow morning, the board will vote to suspend your authority until you get your priorities straight. Grant felt his pulse spike. This is not the time to threaten me. Harrison lowered his voice. Then give us something to work with. Give us one good reason we should trust that your little trip to Texas is not a liability. Grant closed his eyes, looking toward the house where Rowan was now playing, with toy blocks near the window. He realized in that moment that everything he had built was slipping away. But the one thing he truly could not lose was standing right inside that ranch house. His son. When the call ended, he walked back toward Lila with a heavy expression. What happened? She asked quietly. The board is threatening to remove me. They think Texas is a distraction. Lila's expression broke. Grant, I am so sorry. He shook his head slowly. Do not be. I would fight 1,000 boards if it meant being here for Rowan. But the truth was unavoidable. Mason had weaponized the town. The board had weaponized his career, and everyone except Lila and Rowan seemed determined to push him out of the only place he desperately wanted to stay. Rowan ran out onto the porch waving a colored drawing. Look, Mama, look what I made. Grant watched the boy's joy, his tiny shoes slapping the wood, his smile bright and trusting. The sight made something in him harden with resolve. He would not let Mason's lies win. He would not let the board dictate the future of his family. He would not walk away from his son, not again, not ever. The sun dipped beyond the hills of Willow Creek, leaving behind streaks of purple and molten gold across the sky as the town settled into an uneasy quiet. At the ranch, Lila tucked Rowan into bed, smoothing his hair and kissing his forehead, while Grant cleaned paintbrushes in the sink. After spending the afternoon helping Rowan create a cardboard rocket ship, it should have been an ordinary evening. It should have been peaceful. But peace in Willow Creek never lasted long. Not when someone like Mason Wyatt was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Grant stepped onto the porch to take a call from his attorney in Seattle when he noticed something strange in the air, a faint smell like overheated wires. He glanced toward the distant buildings along Main Street, but thought little of it at first. Inside, Lila hung Rowan's jacket near the door when the landline rang sharply, startling her. she answered, hearing frantic breathing on the other side. "Lila Dawson." The voice was jittery and low. "This is Eric from the bakery. Something is happening at your shop. Sparks, smoke. I think there was some sort of electrical problem." Lila froze. "My shop? What do you mean I was closing up for the evening and saw flickering through the window? You need to get down here fast." Lila's heart hammered in her chest. She grabbed her keys and rushed outside. Grant ended his call immediately when he saw her panic. "What is wrong?" "My shop," she gasped. "Eric said there is smoke. Electrical issues. Something is wrong." Grant did not hesitate. "I am coming with you." They raced to her truck. Rowan, awakened by the commotion, stood sleepily in the doorway. "Mama, where are you going?" Lila ran back to him. "Stay inside, baby. Lock the door. We will be right back." Rowan nodded, rubbing his eyes as she kissed him again, and hurried into the truck. They sped down the dirt road toward town. When they reached Main Street, a crowd had already formed outside Lila's music shop. Flames had not erupted, but smoke billowed through the vents of the building. The front windows glowed with a sickly orange light, reflecting damaged electrical wiring inside. Panic surged through Lila as she shoved the door open. "Move," she cried. "I need to get inside." The sheriff stepped in front of her. "Lila, wait. We do not know how unstable it is." Grant came up beside her. "Is anyone inside?" The sheriff shook his head. "We checked the main room. Looks empty, but the back room is locked, and we did not want to break anything without being sure." Lila's face went white. The back room had sentimental instruments, valuable tools, and her private files. But none of that mattered when a sudden small scream echoed from somewhere inside. Everyone froze. Lila's heart stopped. Grant's eyes widened. It was the sound of a child. The townsfolk gasped as Lila shouted, "That is Rowan. He must have followed us." The sheriff cursed and reached for his radio, but Grant was already moving. He sprinted around the building to the back door and slammed his shoulder against it. The wood trembled, but did not break. Rowan's cries grew louder. Grant's blood surged with adrenaline. He struck the door again and again until the lock gave way and the door burst inward. Smoke rolled out in thick gray waves. Inside, electrical sparks danced along a melted junction box. The air was hot and choking. Grant bent low and pushed through the haze. "Rowan, where are you?" A tiny voice cried from behind the instrument shelves. "Daddy." His heart nearly broke in half. Rowan had never called him that before. Grant found him curled beneath a work table, eyes red from crying, clutching the stuffed bear he always carried. Grant scooped him up, shielding him with his body, and turned back toward the exit. But a beam had fallen, blocking the way out. Flames were not present, but the heat was intense, and smoke filled his lungs with every breath. He coughed violently, eyes burning. The crowd outside heard the crash, and Lila screamed Grant. A second exit was on the other side of the shop. He staggered toward it, Rowan shaking in his arms. Grant's legs wobbled, his vision blurred. Rowan sobbed into his shoulder as Grant whispered, "I have you. I will get you out, I promise." He reached the small side door and kicked it open just as the sheriff and 2 townspeople rushed forward to help. Fresh air hit his face like ice, but the relief came too late. Grant's lungs seized from the smoke. His knees buckled. He handed Rowan directly into Lila's arms before collapsing onto the pavement. Grant, Lila screamed, falling to her knees beside him. He wheezed, eyes unfocused. Rowan sobbed uncontrollably, hugging Grant's limp arm. The sheriff shouted for someone to call an ambulance, but Lila was already lifting Grant's head into her lap, her hands shaking violently. "Stay with me," she whispered. "Please stay with me. You saved him. You saved him. Do not leave us." Grant barely managed to speak. "Lila, I told you I will never walk away again." His voice broke into a cough, and he slumped deeper against her. Sirens wailed in the distance as firefighters arrived to contain the electrical fire. An older volunteer firefighter knelt beside them. "We need to get him to Willow Creek Regional. Smoke inhalation can turn fast." The ambulance pulled up, and paramedics rushed out. They placed an oxygen mask over Grant's face and loaded him onto a stretcher. Rowan cried harder, reaching for Grant, as paramedics lifted him. Daddy Grant weakly lifted his hand, just enough to touch his son's fingers before the doors closed. Lila held Rowan tight to her chest as the ambulance sped away. Rowan's small body shook with fear. "Mama, is he going to be okay?" Lila kissed the top of his head, fighting her own tears. "He will. He has to." They drove behind the ambulance to the hospital. Willow Creek Regional ER was a modest building with a parking lot lit by flickering lights. Nurses rushed Grant inside. Lila and Rowan were kept in the waiting room. Lila paced continuously, unable to sit still. Rowan eventually curled into a chair, exhausted and clinging to his bear, watching her with wide, frightened eyes. Time crawled. Finally, a doctor entered the room. Lila ran to him. "Is he all right?" The doctor gave a cautious nod. He inhaled a significant amount of smoke. He needed oxygen and treatment, but he is stable now. He is resting. He kept saying your names. Relief hit Lila so hard her knees nearly buckled. Rowan tugged her hand. "Can we see him?" The doctor smiled gently. Just for a moment. They entered the small hospital room where Grant lay, hooked to monitors. Breathing more steadily now, Lila approached slowly, her emotions tied in a knot. Grant opened his eyes slightly when he heard Rowan's small footsteps. "Daddy?" The word made Grant's eyes fill with tears. He lifted a trembling hand. "Come here, buddy." Rowan climbed onto the side of the bed carefully and rested his head on Grant's shoulder. Lila stood beside them, brushing her fingers against Grant's arm. "Thank you for saving him," she whispered. Grant turned his head toward her, voice raspy. "I would do it every time, for him, for you." Lila leaned closer, tears spilling over. "I thought I lost you," Grant whispered back. "Not a chance. I am right here, and I am not going anywhere ever again." Rowan's breaths grew slow as he fell asleep beside him. Lila rested her hand on both of them as the monitors beeped softly into the night. For the first time in years, they were together. Not perfectly, not safely, but together in the moment, everything finally broke apart. And in that brokenness, something new began to form. Something worth fighting for. Something worth rebuilding from the ashes of the night. Everything fell apart. Dawn broke quietly over Willow Creek Regional as soft amber light filtered through the blinds of Grant's hospital room. Grant woke slowly, his lungs aching with every breath, but his mind sharper now that oxygen flowed steadily through him. Rowan was curled up on the small couch, still fast asleep, with his stuffed bear tucked under his chin. Lila sat beside the bed, her eyes red from crying, yet filled with fierce determination. When Grant opened his eyes, she leaned forward and took his hand gently. "You scared me last night," she whispered. "I thought I was going to lose you." Grant squeezed her fingers, weak but steady. "Not happening. Not after I finally found you again." She looked at him with an expression that held 5 years of pain, longing, and unspoken questions. Before she could speak, a knock at the door interrupted them. A polished man in a tailored suit entered with a tablet tucked under his arm. He wore the stiff expression of someone who lived in a world of boardrooms and quarterly reports, not small-town hospitals. "Grant," he said with clipped tone, "you look alive, barely." Grant sighed. "Harrison, what are you doing here?" Harrison stepped closer, ignoring Lila and Rowan entirely. "The board demanded I come. They want answers. You vanished during a crisis. Stocks dropped. Investors are panicking. And then you end up in the hospital because of some ridiculous backwoods electrical fire." Grant's jaw tightened. "I was saving my son." Harrison blinked as if he had heard wrong. "You're what, my son?" "Rowan." Grant gestured toward the sleeping boy. "And before you start, know this is not a distraction. This is my life." Harrison stared at him, speechless for the first time since Grant had known him. When he finally spoke, his tone softened by a fraction. "Grant, you cannot walk away from your responsibilities." Grant let out a hollow laugh. "Responsibilities are why I am here. I lost 5 years because the company decided it knew what was best for me." Harrison stiffened as the weight of those words sunk in. "You were kept away from some things to protect you, to protect the brand." Grant glared at him. "That protection cost me my family. It cost me knowing my son existed. It cost me the woman I loved." Harrison hesitated, then glanced toward Lila, who rose slowly from her seat. She crossed her arms and looked right at him unafraid. "Grant did not hear from me for years. Someone blocked every letter I sent, every email, every voicemail." Harrison's face paled slightly. He tapped his tablet nervously. Mistakes were made. Grant cut him off sharply. "Stop spinning this. The company interfered. My father interfered. Your whole system interfered. And now the board wants me to crawl back like nothing happened." Harrison tried again. "Look, if you just issue a public statement and return to Seattle, we can smooth this over." Grant leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion mixing with clarity. "Harrison, I am done letting the company control my life." Harrison blinked rapidly. "What are you saying?" Grant looked at Rowan sleeping peacefully. "I am saying I am stepping down." Harrison's jaw dropped. "You cannot be serious. The media storm is already bad. If you leave now, the company could crumble. Investors will riot. We need your face, your leadership." Grant met his stare evenly. "Then maybe it deserves to crumble, because I refuse to stay in a system that forces me to choose between my career and my family." Lila sucked in a breath. Harrison stared at Grant as if he were speaking a foreign language. "You are willing to give up everything," he whispered. Grant turned his gaze to Lila. "She is not everything. She is the only thing. And Rowan is the reason I breathe. I am not choosing between two worlds anymore. I am choosing the one that matters." The room fell silent. Harrison finally backed up, straightening his suit. "Fine. If you step down, you will lose your authority, your corporate protections, your influence." Grant exhaled slowly. "Then I will build something of my own. Something honest. Something here." Harrison shook his head, like he still thought Grant would snap out of it. But Grant's expression remained firm. Harrison left the room, muttering under his breath, shoulders tight. Lila approached the bed, her voice shaking. "Grant, are you sure about this?" He looked at her with deep certainty. "I spent years building an empire because I thought success would fill the void inside me. But none of it meant anything. Not when the people I loved were missing from my life. She brushed a hand against his cheek. You might lose everything. Grant smiled weakly. Then I will start over. With you, with him, if you let me. Lila's eyes filled again, but this time with emotion that softened her entire face. Before she could answer, Rowan stirred and lifted his head. Daddy Grant opened his arms, and Rowan rushed to him, climbing gently onto the bed. Lila steadied him as he leaned against Grant's chest. You scared me, Rowan whispered. Grant hugged him close. I am here now, and I am not leaving again. Later that afternoon, news spread through town that Grant was awake. Rumors swirled thicker than ever, but this time something else floated among the whispers. Gratitude. Because people had seen with their own eyes the way Grant had risked his life to save Rowan. Some of the townsfolk who previously doubted him now stood outside the hospital, murmuring apologies and second guesses. Others glanced nervously toward Wyatt Music Co., as if realizing they had been manipulated. Meanwhile, the sheriff arrived at the ranch with new information. Security cameras from a store near Lila's shop had caught footage of a man in a dark jacket tampering with the electrical panel hours before the smoke appeared. The sheriff showed Lila the video zooming in on a familiar pair of polished boots. Mason. Lila's stomach dropped. Grant watched the footage from his hospital bed, jaw clenched. He did this. He put Rowan in danger. The sheriff nodded grimly. We will handle the legal side, but I want to warn you. Mason knows he is in trouble. He might try to spin this. He already has half the town believing you are the problem. Grant asked calmly. Can I address the town when you are released? Yes. People need to hear the truth. The next day, Grant was discharged with strict instructions to rest, but he insisted on one stop before going to the ranch, the town hall. A crowd had gathered, buzzing with confusion. Mason stood near the front, arms crossed, wearing confidence like a suit of armor, ready to deflect anything thrown his way. When Grant walked up with Lila and Rowan beside him, silence fell. Grant stepped onto the small wooden stage. His voice was soft but firm. I came back to Willow Creek to see Lila. I did not know she had a son. I did not know he was mine. I lost 5 years because people I trusted interfered. And last night, when Rowan was trapped in Lila's shop, it became clear that someone else had interfered too. He nodded toward the sheriff, who lifted the tablet and pressed play. The footage displayed for everyone to see. Mason's face drained of color as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mason tried to step forward. This is taken out of context. The sheriff cut him off. You are under investigation for endangerment and property tampering. Mason backed away as townspeople stared at him in disbelief. Some cursed quietly. Others folded their arms and shook their heads. Grant took a slow breath. I am not here to take Rowan from Texas. I am here to be his father, nothing more, and I am staying. Not as a billionaire, not as a CEO, just as a man who finally understands what matters. The crowd murmured softly this time with understanding, respect, even a touch of admiration. Lila stepped beside Grant and took his hand, an action that made Rowan smile brightly. Grant looked at both of them, feeling a sense of belonging he had never known. The town that had once doubted him now saw the truth, and the empire he had once clung to so tightly no longer defined him. He had chosen love, he had chosen family, and in that choice, he had finally chosen himself. 1 year later, the ranch looked nothing like the quiet, lonely place it had once been. Spring sunlight spread across the fields in soft, warm waves, and the sound of laughter drifted across the front yard, where Rowan was chasing a butterfly with the same energy he used to chase after Grant during their first months together. The boy had grown taller, his curls wilder, and his confidence unshakable, now that he had two parents who loved him without question. Grant stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden railing, watching Rowan dart across the yard with a grin he could not hide. He had traded boardrooms for mornings filled with birdsong, and instead of wearing expensive suits, he now wore jeans boots and a soft cotton shirt with sleeves rolled to his elbows. The man who once lived by the ticking of a corporate clock now measured time in moments spent with his family. Lila stepped outside, carrying a tray with lemonade glasses that sparkled in the afternoon sun. She had flour on her cheek from a baking lesson she had given to a group of kids at her new community music school, which had become the heart of Willow Creek, faster than anyone expected. When she saw Grant watching Rowan, a soft smile lit her face. "You look proud," she teased, handing him a glass. Grant wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I am," he said simply, "of him, of you, of us." Lila rested her head against his shoulder. "Remember when you told me you could start over here?" She asked it softly, like recalling a secret they had once guarded. Grant kissed her forehead. "I did not start over," he murmured. "I started right where I belonged." Below them, Rowan spotted something near the fence line and ran toward it excitedly. "Look, Mama. Look, Daddy, come see." He waved his little arms so wide that Grant had to laugh. Lila squeezed Grant's hand, and they walked across the yard together. The air smelled of wildflowers and fresh-cut grass, and the sky stretched blue and endless above them. Rowan knelt near a cluster of daisies, holding a tiny turtle the size of his palm. He looked up with wide, sparkling eyes. "Can we keep him? Please, I will take good care of him." Grant crouched beside him, studying the little creature. "Well, we can build him a proper habitat," he said. "If you want to help me." Rowan nodded vigorously. "Yes, Daddy." Please, Lila covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. "And thus the Sunset Side Ranch grows bigger," she joked. Grant lifted his gaze to hers, and something tender passed between them, the kind of look that made Lila's chest warm and steady, like she was anchored to a place she never thought she would belong. As they walked back toward the house, Rowan hopped between them, holding both their hands swinging back and forth with each step. When they reached the porch, Lila stopped, suddenly pulling Grant gently to face her. "There is something I want to tell you, something I have been wanting to say for a while." Grant studied her, sensing a shift in her tone. "Lila, you can tell me anything." She looked at Rowan, who was chasing his new turtle across the wooden planks, then back to Grant, her eyes soft but bright with emotion. "I used to think the happiest part of my life was before everything fell apart, before the accident, before losing you, before raising Rowan alone. But now," she took a shaky breath, "now I think the happiest part is everything after, because it led us here." Grant felt his throat tighten as he cupped her face gently. "I missed so much," he whispered. "I missed his first words, his first steps, his first birthday. I missed years with you, but I am here now, and I will spend every day making up for what we lost." She leaned into his touch, eyes shimmering. "You already have." A breeze lifted her hair as he kissed her softly, a lingering kiss that tasted like gratitude and home and quiet promises of forever. When they pulled apart, Rowan cheered dramatically, as if he were watching fireworks instead of two grown adults sharing affection. Daddy kissed Mama again. Do it again. They both laughed as Grant scooped him up, spinning him until his giggles echoed across the yard. Later that evening, as the sun began its slow descent, the three of them sat near the fence, watching the sky shift into hues of orange, rose, and lavender. Rowan played a soft melody on his tiny ukulele one Grant, and Lila had helped him tune earlier. The notes were simple, uneven, and absolutely perfect. Lila leaned her head on Grant's shoulder. Can you believe how different life looks now? Grant shook his head slowly. Not different, he corrected. Right, exactly right. They listened to Rowan humming proudly every time he hit a note correctly. Lila's hand slid into Grant's fingers, curling between them. You know, she murmured, when I imagined what my life would be like, 5 years after everything fell apart, I never pictured this. I never pictured a family. I never pictured peace. Grant turned to her, brushing a kiss against her temple. You deserved peace. You deserved love. And you deserved not to raise Rowan alone. She blinked as a tear escaped down her cheek. Maybe, but what matters is that I am not alone anymore. Grant exhaled a slow breath, allowing the moment to settle deep inside him. The sun slipped lower, painting everything in gold. He pulled Lila closer, whispering against her hair. If the price of finding this family was 5 years of searching, then I would pay it again, every time. Rowan ran toward them again, holding his ukulele above his head triumphantly. I made a song, he announced with the authority only a 5-year-old could muster. Grant smiled. Let us hear it, buddy. Rowan climbed onto Grant's lap, tapping the ukulele strings with enthusiastic confidence. The sound was chaotic and bright and completely beautiful. When he finished, he looked up at them expectantly. Did you like it, Mama Lila? Nodded, pulling him into a hug. I loved it more than anything. Grant ruffled his hair. You are getting better every day. Rowan puffed up with pride. Maybe I can play on stage one day. Lila smiled. You can do anything you want. You have a whole world ahead of you. Rowan leaned back against Grant's chest, relaxing into the warmth of his parents as the sky faded into deep orange. Lila tucked herself under Grant's arm, and he held both of them close, feeling whole in a way he had never experienced in his life. The ranch was quiet, except for the soft chorus of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle across the fields. Somewhere far away, the world kept spinning with its noise and deadlines and power struggles. But here, under the Texas sunset, everything was simple, everything was safe, everything was theirs. Grant looked at Lila and Rowan, sitting against him, framed by the horizon, and understood once and for all that he had not given up an empire. He had traded it for a home, for a family, for a life worth living. Rowan pointed to the sky as the first star appeared. Look, Daddy. Look, Mama. That is our star. Grant kissed the top of Rowan's head. Yes, buddy, that one is ours. Together they watched the stars shimmer as night gently wrapped itself around the ranch. 3 silhouettes against the fading light, a family forged through loss, rebuilt through truth, and held together by a love that finally found its place under the endless Texas sky. If this story touched a soft place in your heart, if you felt something stir entering the moments when Grant chose love over power, when Lila finally allowed herself to be seen again, or when little Rowan called him Daddy, for the very first time, then take a moment to breathe with me right here. Stories like this are not just entertainment. They remind us of the quiet battles people fight every day, the heartbreaks no one sees, the choices that change everything, the courage it takes to try again after life has broken you. And if you stayed with Grant and Lila until the end, if you felt the weight of their 5 lost years, or the healing power of the family they rebuilt, then I want to personally thank you for being here. This channel exists for moments like that, for people like you. You are the reason these stories come alive. Before you go, would you do something simple that helps this story reach someone who might need it tonight? Tap the like button so the algorithm knows this story mattered to you. Subscribe if you want more cinematic, emotional love stories that take you into another world, even if only for 15 minutes. And if you felt connected to Grant, Lila, and Rowan, tell me in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. Was it the door slamming in the first 2 seconds? Was it the flicker of fear when Rowan whispered, "Daddy," in the smoke? Was it the moment Grant stood before the town and finally chose love instead of empire? Or maybe it was something small, a detail, a line of breath that stayed with you after the video ended. I read every comment, and they guide every story we create next. And if you are watching from somewhere in the world, a city, a small town, a ranch like Willow Creek, let me know where you are tuning in from. This channel is home to viewers from every corner of the globe, and your message might be the one that warms another person's heart tonight. Finally, if this story reminded you that love can survive years of silence, misunderstandings, and the walls we build around ourselves, then share it with someone who could use a reminder that second chances do exist. That family can be chosen, rebuilt, and rediscovered. That healing is real, and sometimes it arrives in boots on a dusty Texas porch, with a boy carrying a blue bicycle waiting nearby. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. Thank you for supporting stories filled with hope, strength, and a little bit of magic. Until the next video, stay kind, stay hopeful, and remember that even the hardest nights can lead to the softest, brightest mornings. Now tell me, what story do you want to see next?